We're always telling your stories, and it's time someone tells ours. We're humans first, journalists second. We chose this career to give you a voice. Now we're voicing ours. It's true, journalism has much room for improvement, but not all hope is lost, and we want your trust back by humanizing one journalist at a time. We're sharing with you what we go through to bring you the news. The pain, the tears, the trauma, and the mental health struggles. It's painful, and sometimes we even work 2 jobs to make ends meet. But we all have something in common. The passion, the joy, and the love we feel for storytelling and holding the powerful accountable. That includes holding ourselves accountable. So here are stories from us. This is how we want to help improve the news industry. The Awakened Journalist is proud to present Media Healers by Emiliana Molina Fajardo. Hi everyone, welcome back to The Awakened Journalist and our special project, Media Healers. Today we'll be speaking with Scott Monaghan. He's a Peabody Award winning photographer and a 2-time Emmy Award winner with more than 30 years of experience in the news industry, in videography, lighting, and editing. He worked for Univision Network for more than 20 years as a photographer and director of photography of the news magazine Aqui y Ahora, among other news shows in the national television network. He decided to quit the news industry in 2018 after covering major national and international news stories like the Sandy Hook school shooting in 2012, as well as Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016, and multiple natural disasters, among them Hurricane Harvey in Texas in 2017. So Scott, thank you for being with us here today and welcome.
My pleasure.
All right, Scott, so let's start with the basics. What led you into becoming a photographer?
This is going way back, back in 1980, locally, up here in West Palm. I was on the floor crew at a station, making minimum wage, living with my parents, graduated University of Miami, and an opening came up in the news department. And I tagged along with another guy, and it was scary because this was back in the day where you had a camera, a deck, and belts. It was like deep sea diving. And I enjoyed it. I've always had an interest in current events. And so that was my foray, and I didn't screw up really badly. I did screw up, but I didn't screw up badly. And I worked my way in.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, clearly you didn't screw up bad enough because 20 plus years later, you were still in the news industry. So congratulations, it's a long career. Scott, I wanted to ask you, part of, Media Healers is obviously to speak about the good and the challenges that come with being in the news industry. So I wanna start, I guess, by asking you what have been some of the most rewarding moments in your career as a photographer.
Most rewarding, I had written that down, and I think it's where you get information out. There's a story that I did with Maria Elena Salinas. Mm-hmm. It's actually the one that we won the Peabody Award for. Okay. And we went down and interviewed 3 of the presidents down in Central America, but we also went with the migrants, went to where they lived and where they were leaving from. Because I think it's real easy to paint these brushes of why and they're invading and they're doing this. And we actually talked to these people about why they would risk their lives or their kids' lives to leave wherever they're from. And we also got that perspective, but also the perspective of the governments. And I think when you can get information out like that, it's super important to get it to the people. Now, what they do with it's on their shoulders. But, because it was interesting to see, especially what the politicians had to say. So. For sure. And that's amazing. Congratulations on all of those awards. Well deserved. And you've also worked, we're going to brag a little bit about your career, but you've worked with Maria Elena Salinas and you've also worked with Jorge Ramos. What are other prominent figures in the news industry that you've worked with? Those are probably 2 of the biggest. A lot of the foot soldiers, a lot of the correspondents, But I back in 1986, there was a show that it wasn't Univision then. It was called Spanish International Network, or SIN. I was working for SIN. And we went down to cover the El Salvador earthquake in 1986. Wow. And Jorge was just a correspondent at that point. He was, I think he might have been anchoring part of the show called Mundo Latino.
Yeah.
But so I've known him for a majority of his career, and he's a good man. He's a good journalist and a good guy. And will fight for what he believes, which is good to see.
Yeah, that's amazing. You've literally, grown along with these very prominent figures that are just huge names in the Latin media news industry and in the news industry as a whole too. So, okay, those have been some of the rewarding moments. Let's talk about the challenging moments. When we were speaking over the phone, 30 plus years in the news industry is a long career. And you have covered just so much. But there was 3 stories I think you spoke about, and one was the Sandy Hook school shooting. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I think that was, we talk about trigger points, or we talk about, kind of those forks in the road. Part of our business is covering the really bad stuff, getting that information out, not sensationalizing it, but getting it out. And I think over the years, and especially once you get up to the network level, you're going to be going to the tornadoes and the hurricanes and the shootings. That one hit me really hard. I was actually in Honduras on a story, and we started seeing it break on our news feeds. And we landed back in Miami, and we were told, we're going to bring stuff to the airport, just fly up to LaGuardia and then drive over to Connecticut. And it hit me really hard because it's right around the holidays. And as you and I talked before, driving around and seeing wherever there was a state trooper, knowing that a little one had passed. And I remember sitting in the bathtub at my hotel and just sobbing, because it just was, and this was after Virginia Tech. This was after mass shooting after mass shooting after mass shooting. And I had always said that, when they do it to kids, and it wasn't if they do it, it was when they would do it, then this is going to be where we have something happening. And it didn't. And that one, I remember talking with my wife, and I'm saying, I really think this is starting to affect me. I think we as journalists, you can put a wall up, and you can, especially as a cameraman or camerawoman, you can say, I'm looking through the lens, and that's that little separation. But that one that hurt. It was a real struggle.
How did you cope back then? Do you remember getting, tools or coaching or guidance or?
No. I mean, Univision offered, I'm not there anymore. They had an EAP, I think, but there was, I think in this business, you just kind of man up or woman up, and, it's just part of the thing. And, you see a dead body, or you interview a family that's just lost, and you just deal with it, go out and have a beer afterwards or whatever. So that wasn't like you got back and somebody was, hey, here's a little survey, or how about you go ahead and talk to this doctor? It's just like, hey, listen, we need you to go to here now, So, I can't think of any formal, okay, you just dealt with a really bad thing, you need to talk to somebody.
Yeah. And there's definitely that common sentiment that we just have to move on to the next news story, What have been other stories or news coverage that have really left a mark on you? I mean, because you've been in ample school shootings, mass shootings in general as well.
Well, the first, I didn't tell you this one. The first story that I got hired, they said, listen, we need, we're going to hire you, but you have to go to Alaska. Like, it's a problem. And I'm like, you're kidding. I'll go to,
Yeah.
And so we went up there, and we went out on a crab boat. And this is before they did the dangerous catch.
Okay.
And so we were out there for about a week, doing the story, following a Honduran man that was going to be his big break, and he wound up getting really seasick, and they threw him off the boat. But So we did that story. Then we did a follow-up story in Anchorage. But 2 years later, I'm sitting at home and I'm talking with my wife, and I'm just going through the news feeds, and I see a crab boat sunk up in the Bering Sea, and I look at it. It's our boat, the boat that we were on. It sank. Everybody that we interviewed was killed, except for one guy because his wife didn't let him go. He said, "I don't want you going on the boat." So we called my correspondent, called the executive producer. We were on a plane the next day back up, and there had been one survivor of that. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't all bad, but it tends to be the bad ones stick in your head, and just trying to you try to get it out of your head, and it doesn't always.
Yeah, I mean that's traumatizing. You knew all the people that were on that boat.
Yeah, and there's all Latinos for the most part, except for the captain, and and just here today and gone today. They never found the boat, didn't find the bodies, which is nuts. So.
And why? Do you remember why it sunk? Was it?
Yeah, I think they did a board of inquiry with the Coast Guard, and it was over. Again, I don't quote me. I think it was overloaded with crab pots. And when you go there, it's during January, and there's a lot of icing, a lot of cold weather. I don't think they could say definitively that was the cause, but they suspected that it capsized, because there was one gentleman that survived, and he actually was a 6'6" former Navy SEAL, had been in Mogadishu, the Black Hawk Down, and he had been on watch, and he kept his survival suit on, and that was the reason he lived, because he had that on. He got into a life raft. So, wow. But yeah, so that was another one of those, like, wow, coulda, shoulda, coulda, woulda, might have been me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So.
What did you think back then, as you just kind of sat with the feelings of it could have been me?
I thank God. I mean, it's one of those things you don't dwell on it. And I'm sure, you felt that. You go into situations. I don't think we ever go into it thinking something's going to happen. I just think, okay, that'll be the other person. That'll be the other guy, the other woman. Nobody's going to pull a gun on me. Nobody's going to chase me. And generally it doesn't happen, but on occasion it does. So, that one was just like, hey, that's they're for the grace of God, because when we were on the boat, my bunk was in the bow, underneath, up in the bow. So every wave you hit, you were bouncing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and I think you're right. We, as journalists, don't often see how we're risking our lives to tell certain stories. It's kind of difficult because we're very passionate about our jobs. So we don't second guess when we are sent to a story. We just kind of go and do our job. So yeah, I do agree with you that I measure the risks.
I remember during Katrina, we were in airboats driving around New Orleans and bouncing off the roofs of cars, and people in their houses, or you'd see a body in the water, and it's just like, and they wouldn't leave their houses, and just, and now, we were going back to sleep in an RV, but at least we had air conditioning and some food.
Wow. And then even as you were driving by in the boat, you would see the bodies and the people in the house.
Well, yeah, you would. I mean, on this one occasion, we were heading into the residential areas, and you would see the bodies in the water.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
And and that's not supposed to happen in America.
Seriously.
That's third world problems.
What did oh my gosh, so many stories. What do you think you've done throughout the years to kind of stay sane? Then, if there wasn't necessarily guidance or psychological treatment or support?
I think probably talking to other journalists, talking to my wife. I think what happened, and kind of what we had talked about, what precipitated me getting out is I think I finally just got to the breaking point. Like I had said, this Uvalde shooting just happened, and I haven't been I'm still in the business, but more on the production side now.
Yeah.
And I tensed up, because thinking, oh, my phone's going to ring, and when you go and you're with these families at the literal worst, horrendous times, and as journalists, we drop in and we pop out, and all the satellite trucks are lined up, and the RVs are there, and the big tents, and then boom, and then the next big story, and and when I started getting, I don't want to say bitter, but I used to get, I don't want to, this can sound horrible, but when it's a big story, you kind of get an adrenaline rush. It's long hours, traveling on a plane, doing whatever, and when I started to dread it, and when it was a burden and not an opportunity, that's when I said, this is probably, you're starting to run on fumes.
Yeah.
We had another situation. We had gone down to Mexico. We spent a lot of time in Juarez during when they were calling it Mexcanistan, when the cartels were going crazy.
Yeah.
And we had gone down to cover a story where 72 migrants had been gunned down in a barn right past Matamoros and I think Tamaulipas, right along the border.
Okay.
And long story short, we get there and Univision gets a call and it says, and I'm going to butcher the Spanish, but they said, ¿Por qué tú tienen, was it, tres mexicanos, dos cubanos y un gringo? So they knew the makeup of our crew.
Wow.
That were at this hotel.
Yeah.
The next day, we were going to go to the town and they found the head of the police investigator in the middle of the road on the way to this town. So they called us and said, don't leave, stay at the hotel. Then the next day they said, get out and go to El Paso. Just leave, get out, load up and go. And that was like, okay, so,
Did you feel like your life was clearly in danger back then? In that situation,
that point, yeah, I always, you think as a journalist, it's like I've got the big P on my jacket or TV on my window.
Yeah,
a lot of these places, a bullet doesn't read. It doesn't see TV. It doesn't, and not just Mexico. I mean, any places, and there's so much hatred towards the media now for a lot of different reasons. Yeah. That yeah, I mean that was, again, it was a little nerve-wracking, because when they and they were having a lot of other ancillary stuff go on. There were some fire bombings and grenades being thrown in Matamoros, and that's when we said, yeah, this is, you got to get the news out, but you don't need to die for it. So
yeah, no, not at all, especially when they knew exactly who was part of the crew. That's definitely scary.
Yeah.
Scott, let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned Uvalde, and I want to talk a little bit about that experience because you quit news in 2018. My first question on that before we talk about Uvalde is, what was the last straw for you to quit? Like I know you just mentioned, you were dreading the work. I'm guessing that came with feelings of feeling depleted or overwhelmed or burnt out.
I mean, for me, I wound up going to also El Paso in 2019 as a freelancer for the Walmart shooting. I had forgotten about that. I think what I think it was Newtown was a big trigger, because that just, I still tear up over that. It still, resonates with me. And I think realizing, where I'm expending all this energy and, at least for me, it's like a deflated balloon, and again, we roll in as journalists with these, this huge, how are you doing? We got to get the interview with the mom. We got to get the interview with the dad. And 3 days later, everybody's gone, and those people have just had the worst thing. They've been basically, the media's come in and hammered them and we leave. And it's like, I just kind of, I don't know if I'm making sense. It became more like, to me, in my mind, this is like this weird game, and I didn't want to play in it anymore. I didn't want to, I understand you have to cover it, but I didn't want to cover it anymore. I just, it was too draining. It was too, and if I had my wife sitting next to me, she would attest to it. It's just, when you get nervous 4 years later that your phone's going to ring when there's a big shooting, that's a problem. That's a problem.
Do you feel, and I know this is, a lot of feelings are coming up for you right now. I didn't cover the Newtown shooting, but I was at El Paso shooting, and that was overwhelming for me. So I can't even imagine what you were feeling, witnessing kindergarteners be the victims of domestic terrorism. And then on top of that, I think part of why we go into the news industry is to do meaningful work. But on top of that, to cover these news stories, especially the school shootings, right? And not see any clear or concrete action being taken by government officials has definitely have to add to the impact and the toll that it takes on covering these stories. Because it's like we're covering traumatic events. We've 100% go through PTSD and secondary trauma. And then on top of that, to not see resolutions or solutions being brought to these problems, it's kind of like, well, then what am I telling these stories for?
Yeah. And it's the thing of, for me, at least, having done it so many times, like, you're going to these families and hanging a mic or what, how do you feel? I wanted to punch myself in the face. It's like, how do you think they feel? Put yourself, what I get that you have to ask the question, but you don't. Because it's like, that's an obvious question, I don't know what the other question might be, but it's like, they're holding the pictures of their little kid, and I'm there, and that's, to me, it got to be so intrusive.
Yeah.
In that, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think you're alone in that sentiment. And I don't know like what the best way to cover these kinds of stories is, right? I think we're all figuring it out as we go, but I think there is definitely a common sentiment and a common agreement that the way certain stories are being told don't work any longer. And
right.
To find new,
because one of the things that sticks with me, and this may be a little too much in your face, so tell me.
No, okay, go
when
for
we
it.
were in El Paso, I was near one of the bodies at a funeral home, and so you couldn't see anything, but it was a body bag and lots of blood. That's the stuff we have to show people, and you can't. You know what I mean? You have it's if you want to exact change, you really have to, I think, not to use it for sensationalism, but asking somebody how they feel about their kid dying. I just don't know that, what other than getting their pain to share with other people, maybe that will exact some change. I think that maybe might work, but yeah,
Yeah, it's definitely I think it's up for debate, right? And I think there's really good organizations. For example, I read about this organization the other day. It's called Solutions-Based Journalism, that are trying to change the way we're telling stories in the industry.
Right.
Yeah, and I think, I have no idea what the best way is.
Neither do I.
I just know that, for example, in those shootings, I would stop mentioning the names of the perpetrators.
Yep. And not give them any, and again, we have to get the story out. I don't have a problem with that. And maybe my fumes had just run out, and maybe it was time for, a new man or woman to step into that, because it's part of the job, there was, and I don't want it to all be just, it was gloom and doom and I had this thunderhead following me. There was a lot of, fascinating stories that we did along the border too. But those are the ones that they're crushing, cumulatively, they get to be crushing, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, you made it way more time or way longer than most journalists do, right? Because most journalists nowadays are even quitting after 2 years or 5 years
Yeah.
of being in the news industry. It's just it's overwhelming, and
Well, I think the younger journalists now. I mean, I'm the old dude, but you guys have to do Instagram. You have to do Facebook. You have to do the MMJ, which I'm totally against because somebody's going to die with
same.
that. I think that's super dangerous.
Yeah.
And there's so many spaces out there that have to be filled with information, and it's a lot. It's a lot. You know, you're not just reporting for the 6 o'clock or the 11 o'clock. You're doing 2 o'clock news, or then you've got to post something on Facebook and you got to cut something for Insta. My head would explode. You know, it's a lot of time, a lot of information.
Yeah, and that often leads to the stories being told on a very superficial level, right? Because there's no time to investigate farther or find deeper, more meaningful resources to tell the story.
Right.
Scott, so that leads me to the Uvalde school shooting, and then what we talked over the phone. So you quit in 2018, but then you went back and covered the
El Paso.
Yeah. But the shooting in Uvalde just happened recently, and you're focusing on freelancing and production. And you want to speak to me a little bit about what went down as soon as you found out?
Thankfully, my phone didn't ring. It didn't ring. I've got a ton of friends that were there. I've talked with them.
Yeah.
You know, and that's been a different situation because they were having issues with motorcyclists down there running the media out, just trying to do their job, you know. But again, it was the same thing. It's just when initially, you know, you see, okay, a couple people dead, and then I'm like, no, there's not going to be a couple people dead. It's always two injured, and then an hour later, it's 20 dead. I didn't realize it was kids.
Yeah.
And that's, again, I was right back at Sandy Hook, you know, those are babies, you know. So.
Do you feel like you have PTSD?
Oh, yeah. You know, I think that, I think if I didn't, I would be probably a little emotionally cold-hearted. You know, because I've got 6 kids, a couple grandkids now, and you put yourselves in their shoes. I don't think any of us can go to a story, whether it be local or national, and not have feelings. I mean, you feel their heartbreak. You know, I'm sure you have, and I know friends of mine, you cry. You might not cry in front of them, but you're going to cry when you get in the car, or you're going to cry when you get back to your house.
Yeah. Or
you're going to punch a wall or do something, you know, because it's just not fair, you know, but we still have to show up and we still have to report it.
Yeah. I think there were several times as well, just like you, that I literally just sat in the bathtub crying.
Yeah.
So I think we've all been there. And if you say you haven't, then yeah, as much as we can emotionally try to detach ourselves from the story while we're telling it and while we're on the field, when we come home, you bet we're crying or doing something about it to deal with that.
You know, and I was blessed at Univision that we had some bosses. They were pretty good. Were pretty good. And if you needed to vent a little bit, but you know, I went to journalism school many years ago. I don't know that that's even brought up in classes about dealing with. I mean, one of the first things I remember as a cameraman was seeing what's called a Signal 7 here locally, which is a dead person. And it was an elderly woman who had been in like this simple car accident, but she was in the floorboards of her car and her head was facing backwards. And I still see that. And that was 40 years ago.
Wow.
You know, and I'm going to be 65 in a week, and I was 26. So do the math, you know, and I can still see that face, you know, and it's you know, and that's the stuff you see, you know, the bone. I told you the bone to pick, you know, with the shoe. So, you know.
That's traumatizing. Yeah, that's definitely a lot of trauma throughout your career to have to cover. So I applaud you for hanging on for so long, you know, especially um, without certain tools or support to cope with those situations, right? So I think that brings me to the next point, right, on how we can improve in the news industry. I think normalizing these conversations and bringing awareness to the challenges, mental, emotional, physical, that we face in the industry definitely deserves improvements and a change.
Because I think that from a management standpoint, you have to think about mental health for the people, for your reporters and correspondents and editors. I mean, people looking at the footage, people out gathering the footage, people interacting with the people that are dealing with it. And again, I don't see it out there. There's EAPs, there's employee assistance programs at different places, but I think it needs to be more proactive.
Mm-hmm.
That there needs to be like if you're coming back from a story, afford your people the opportunity, at least, hey, how you doing? So.
Yeah. And I think before you came on to the interview, you told me you spoke to a colleague of yours, one of your former students that you used to work with. And you guys were talking about all the mental health and the tools. And we spoke about how journalists should also be seen as first responders. What would you like to see improved in the news industry in terms to that? Like, what do you think would have helped you more and possibly would have kept you in the news industry longer?
I think if there's a template that you would have that, again, it's on my shoulders. If I'm feeling something, I need to reach out. But it's also, if you're going to reach out, what do you reach out to? Do you, as a photographer, do you have a macho chief photographer that, come on, don't be a pussy, just deal with it, or, what I'm saying? Does that come from upper management? Is it just whatever big story like that? Let's afford our people to talk, again, partly on me, but I also think partly on management, recognizing that we're not robots.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to give the idea like everything was gloom and doom, but it was, for me at least, it was a cumulative, really bad stories that was one of the big factors in me just saying I'm going to wrap it up. I've got my awards. I've seen the world, but I can't deal with this, and again, Uvalde was a perfect example. I just, I'm going, I don't have a beeper. I don't have it, but I'm like, oh my God, it's like, no, they're not going to call. You're okay. And if they do call, you can say no.
Exactly.
That's
over it.
That's not normal. So, but it's a good career. I'd recommend it for anybody. Just talk. Make sure you talk.
Yeah, it's a beautiful career. But it definitely, if you don't have the tools or the equipment or the support to cope with the difficult stories, it could be excruciating and painful.
Yeah.
So to end the interview on a positive note, one of the highlights of your career, I know I already asked you this question and you talked about Maria Elena Salinas and covering that story, but maybe a moment that made you extremely happy while you were.
I think, if you look at my Facebook or my Instagram, I mean, I saw the world. I was in Slovenia. I was in France. I was in Baghdad. I was on a mountain in where was that? Yosemite, chasing with the DEA but it was so gorgeous, and I get a lot of strength out of nature. That's where I kind of go. Like I told you today, I was kayaking.
Yeah.
and just the beauty. And the reality is there's really good people. I remember being in Mexico and interviewing, I forget what the story was, but this woman was sweeping her dirt floor to allow us to come into her home to feed us. People that would give you the shirt off their backs, and there's so many good people, and this career afforded me to see the world, to see the people, to see the cultures, to speak un poquito de español, but just to, that's a gift, to see other cultures, to see other people, to see how, I was in Colombia, I was in everywhere. I mean, yeah, and that's a blessing. That's a blessing. So, I joke with my wife. I said, if I left tomorrow, I'm a man most blessed. Really good people, good opportunities, a bit of sadness, but that's life. I just describe life, so, and I think overall, as I told you before, I've got a very strong faith. And I think that probably more than anything has kind of buoyed me with this, the why. Some of the stuff, there isn't an answer. There isn't a why. You can't deal with crazy. So,
can you leave us with a quote that you tell yourself, or that you would tell yourself to keep going after difficult news stories?
A quote. I'm trying to think. I'm going to tell you one thing. You can edit it out or not, but it comes from the Bible for me, and it's my strength, and it's, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And that got me through air raids in Baghdad. It got me through crazy stuff in Juarez. It got me seeing through people hogtied and shot on the floor in Juarez. Places that I was scared, that I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. So.
And here you are, and you're okay.
Yeah. Very, very thankful.
I love that. Scott, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I feel honored to have had you on Media Healers, and I appreciate you so much for opening up and sharing your story so raw and so vulnerably.
All right. Well, thank you for doing this. It's super important.
Thank you.
Journalists, this one's for you, to help you heal, to help you understand your worth, and to help you know you're not alone. So share the love and subscribe to Spotify and YouTube, and follow us on Instagram. The Awakened Journalist is proud to present Media Healers by Emiliana Molina Fajardo.